Very good evening. Today, we are conducting a panel discussion on the topic of minimum wage, a boon or bane. Joining us for our panel discussion are some of very well esteemed members in their own respective fields. First of all, we have Mr. Haikal, who is our Human Resources Minister. Mr. Haikal had been the Human Resources Minister from the year 2019. Previously, he was the CEO of Talent Corp, a government-initiated corporation whose aim is to train, reskill, and upskill young workers. He is well known for his articulate speeches in the parliament regarding matters of economics, wealth, and prosperity. Next we have is Mr. Muhaimin bin Masri, our economist. Mr. Muhaimin is the Deputy Director in Pemandu, that is the Performance Management and Economics Delivery Unit. He is also the head of Department of Economics in University Malaya. He is involved in analyzing and developing economic forecasts, advising the government on economic matters, and also an independent director in a few public listed firms. Moving on, we have Mr. Chia Junwei, a business owner. Mr. Chia is the director of Sea Pipeline, a pipeline construction firm. He's a well-known player in the pipeline construction business and has been in the business for over 20 profitable years. Finally, we have Mr. Amir Adi, the president of Malaysian National Workers Union. He was previously a gold medalist in accounting and finance from MMU. He's one of the main proponents in favor of the minimum wage. Previously, he was involved in the lobby of government in setting up the minimum wage committee and framework. Now, over the past few years, there have been a lot of growing frustrations among the working class and also has been reflected in the political discourse regarding rising inequality. A very good solution which a lot of people have been claiming is the introduction of a minimum wage. This is what we are going to discuss today. Now, we have actually brought up the topic of politics and the minimum wage. So I'm going to refer to you, Mr. Haikal. Now, my question to you is simple, Mr. Haikal. What is the political ramification of setting up a minimum wage? Over to you. Mr. Haikal, I request you to turn on your microphone.
Sorry. Hi, good evening. My name is Muhammad Haris, and I am the Human Resource Minister. As you all know, the government has implemented the new minimum wage in Malaysia, increased to 1,200 per month in 2020 from 1,100 in 2019, with a hope to help take some burden off the shoulders of both employees and employers, as well as fulfill their needs. Minimum wages and their increase have extensive appeal to the general public and hence to politicians who rely on the public for their votes. Nevertheless, good politics does not mean good economics. In most countries around the world, voters support rises in the minimum wage. In UK, a poll in January 2014 found 66% favoring a substantial increase in the minimum wage, with majorities among supporters of all main political parties. In some places, this political pressure will almost certainly lead to much higher minimum wage than we have seen in recent experience. The minimum wage is designed to create a minimum standard of living to protect the health and well-being of employees. When employees' well-being is taken care of, their productivity will increase as they do not have to spend their life worrying about their health and not to go broke. On that account, we, the government, owes it to the poor workers to revise the minimum wage urgently to make up for decades of abuse by paying unfair and low wage. That's all from me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Haikal. Um, so, Mr. Haikal, you have made a very convincing argument regarding the politics of minimum wage, where there's approval in the UK. You have quoted a study. So, moving on to you, Mr. Muhammad. So, in the world of today, is the minimum wage really necessary from an economics point of view? Please clarify. Over to you.
Okay, hello. My name is Moimin, and I am economist. In economics, minimum wage is not necessary and it's a bad idea because it will affect the economy. It works best if wages are set by supply and demand and not by any other factor, for example, like government rules. So let's say if I set minimum wage for the entire country, let's say if I'm increasing minimum wage for 15 ringgit per hour, it will lead into two things. First, it will kill jobs. Second, the minimum wage will hurt the people we most wanted to help. So, for my first point, one of the basic lessons of economics is that when the price of something goes up, people will buy less of it. For example, if the price of chocolate smoothie rises, you will expect consumers to buy fewer of them. This law of demand also affects the market of low-skilled workers. Raising the minimum wage means a higher cost of employing each worker, which makes workers less affordable than before. For example, like our coffee shop won't keep a worker at a mandated 15 ringgit per hour if that worker effects only result in 7 ringgit per hour in added revenue. Over the course of the year, the shop that keeps such a worker at full time will lose about 15,000 ringgit. So instead, it will eliminate that job, and evidence shows that employers, in fact, do respond in this way to minimum wage hikes. By mandating a minimum wage, the government actually harming both employers and workers and hurting the economic's productivity to boot. Recent research shows that about 1.4 million jobs were destroyed in the late 2000s. For the worst, those job losses were probably suffered by the people who need jobs the most. So that's all for me.
Well, Mr. Muhaimin, that was indeed a very good point from you regarding the economics of the minimum wage. So, over to you, Mr. Chia, our business owner. So, Mr. Muhaimin brought up and explained about the economics of minimum wage, theory of supply and demand. So, how does these things affect your business? And what is the impact of minimum wage on your business? Over to you, Mr. Chia.
Okay, good evening everyone. I'm Mr. Cha and I'm the director of C Pipeline. And the field I'm working in is pipeline construction. First of all, my company has about 30 workers, which more than 10 are working inside and a few of them are foreign workers. But the minimum wage is at 1,200 ringgit per month, and my budget for workers' wage is limited. My budget will not be enough. Imagine if I only had 10 site workers. What they're doing are the same thing, but in the end, I have to pay them 12,000 ringgit per month. Actually, site workers should not worth 1,200 ringgit per month, especially when it comes to foreign workers. It is a huge amount for my company, and the expenses have increased much more. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chia. So, Mr. Chia brought up the topic about whether workers deserve the minimum wage. Some workers might not produce the revenues which might be justified for paying them the minimum wage. So, over to you, Mr. Amir. What okay? Is the minimum wage of 1,200 really justified from your point of view for the workers? Over to you.
Hello, my name is Amir Edi Adlan. I'm the president of Malaysia National Workers Union. Back to the question, I think it depends on the workers' liabilities, such as the places they are staying. Are they staying near the town where the rent is quite expensive than staying outside of town? Do they have families that they need to support? To me, it wouldn't be a problem for a young person that just finished high school because they don't have much responsibilities like older people. It will be struggle for the older folks that need to feed and support their family because of the high cost of living in most places in Malaysia nowadays. So I think it is pretty subjective. That's all.
Well, thank you, Mr. Amir. So, Mr. Amir claims that a minimum wage, the necessity of a minimum wage is pretty subjective based on factors such as location and place. So, now, coming back to you, Mr. Haikal, our minister. So, what is the role that a minimum wage plays in the plans of Malaysia to become a high income nation? Would you care to elaborate on that? Over to you.
Okay. For these past few years, everyone has been suffering from low minimum wage as cost of living in Malaysia is continuously increasing. Minimum wage legislation tend to be rationalized as an anti-poverty device. People who work full-time should not live in poverty. So the role of minimum wage when increased is to let citizens have more purchasing power. When citizens have a higher purchasing power, businesses will increase their profits and contribute to our country's GDP due to increased spending. Therefore, our economy will thrive because of higher growth in multiple industries. Furthermore, our country will attract more great talents when minimum wage is increased. Nowadays, a lot of talented young people prefer to work overseas due to better pay and benefits. Therefore, the government should consider increasing the minimum wage in order to help industries strive with a great workforce. Finally, when companies in our country start to offer more attractive wage to those who can bring a lot of value, employees with children can have more money to have a proper lifestyle and spend on their children's education. Thus, indirectly, will bring more quality talents to the workforce in the next generation. That is all.
Well, thank you, Mr. Haikal. So, Mr. Haikal brought up questions and matters relating to brain drain and as such. He also brought up few other matters relating to minimum wage. So now, uh, this is my question to you, Mr. Chia. Would you would you increase hiring if the minimum wage is imposed? So because Mr. Haikal actually brought up concepts about spending, national spending, where if there's a minimum wage, people have higher disposable income. But now my question to you is, would you increase hiring if minimum wage is imposed? Over to you, Mr. Chia. Mr. Chia, please unmute your microphone.
So sorry, guys. Okay, answering to your question, no, I will not increase hiring since my budget for wage is limited. To control the budget, and the best I could do is fire the workers with the least productivity. Okay, thanks.
Well, that was a very direct answer. Fire the workers who is not productive. So I'm very sure Mr. Amir, being the president of the workers' union, will have very different opinion on this. So to you, Mr. Amir, I have a question for you. Is would you prefer an increase in the minimum wage or a cap, a limit on the maximum income of top management? Because we have always seen the case of where rich business people, they abuse their wealth and their power. They get to spend money on, let's say, private jets, while their workers are slaving through on the bare basics. So, would you prefer an increase in minimum wage or a limit on the maximum income to be earned by the top management? Over to you, Mr. Amir.
To me, I would prefer to increase the minimum wage because by doing so, it will reduce our rate of poverty and it will also help family to support their children. Furthermore, raising the minimum wage will have positive impact on the economy. Research has been made that higher minimum wage is not the cause of high unemployment rate. And also, I would like to suggest that the government should also make sure that other benefits provide a full package for the low wage workers and their families as well, as they will also need access to affordable and quality healthcare. That's all.
Well, thank you, Mr. Amir. So, Mr. Amir is actually advocating an increase in minimum wage rather
Yeah.
than a limit on the maximum income earned by the top management. That is indeed a very good proposition, I must say, based on his arguments. So, anyway, now we have questions coming on from the floor. So, our first question today is directed towards Mr. Harris. So, Mr. Harris, our question to you. Do foreign workers too deserve the minimum wage? What are your opinions on this matter? Over to you, Mr. Harris.
Okay, excuse me. The government believes that the foreign workers also deserve to get their minimum wage raised. We, the Human Resource Ministry, has been urged to stop the slogan, any job is better than no job. Consequently, we should look at ways to further raise minimum wage to attract Malaysians to take up jobs that are deemed and dangerous and demeaning. Before efforts were being made, government policies have managed to keep the wages for these jobs low so that they can reap high profit at expense of these miserably paid workers, who are mainly made up of migrant labor. The employers have taken advantage of the poor foreign workers who are at the mercy of Malaysian bosses for their unfortunate survival. In order to solve the situation, the government strive to prevent Malaysia from ending up as a dumping ground for foreign workers when employers decide not to care for their employees. To conclude my answer to your question, foreign workers deserve to get their minimum wage raised. Their race doesn't determine their worth as a human being. I hope that the government can take its gear to gear 6 towards defending these foreign workers' rights beside making sure that they can have the opportunity to live a more prosperous life with their raised minimum wage. Thank you.
Well, that was a compelling argument for the minimum wage, considering on the grounds of considering humanitarian and moral grounds. So, for a little different perspective, I will move on to you, Mr. Muhammad. So, Mr. Muhammad, there's been a question raised for you, which is how will raising the minimum wage affect poverty for low-income workers? So, will minimum wage affect poverty levels among low-income workers? Over to you.
Okay, so in my opinion, raising the minimum wage may or may not reduce poverty majorly in most developing countries, but again, it isn't guaranteed. If somehow it may reduce poverty, the impact would be modest because the minimum wage applies to only a minority of poor workers. In particular, it does not cover workers in the large reform sectors, and raising the minimum wage creates losers as well as winners among poor households, depending on employment effects, the wage distribution, and effects on the household head, pulling some out of poverty while at the same time pushing others in. So, in short, raising the minimum wage could be part of comprehensive poverty reduction package, but it cannot or should not be the only or even the main idea or tool to reduce poverty. Hope that answers your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Muhammad. So what you are basically telling is it might not be the full answer towards alleviating poverty, but it should not be the only answer. I think that is the essence of what he's trying to mention to us. So now, for a more practical and on-ground view of this, so I'm moving on towards a question directed to Mr. Chia, our small business owner. So, Mr. Chia, there's been a question directed to you, that is, does increasing the
Mhm.
minimum wage kill jobs for the unskilled worker? Over to you.
Okay. Uh, in my opinion, the increasing in minimum wage kills jobs, especially for unskilled workers. It is because business owners have budget on their workers' wage and workers' number, and the increment cuts off business owners' budget. As a result, business owners tend to hire less people for their projects and more on machinery. Therefore, the unskilled jobs will be replaced by machines. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your answer. So basically, I would assume he's telling that an increase in the minimum wage would actually increase spending on capital expenditure, machines, and in plants, rather than cash moving on towards workers. So this is not something that we would expect to happen. But I'm not going to draw conclusions here. So moving on to Mr. Amir. So, from the view of a worker, an employee, so there is this question directed to you, which is, must young workers be paid the minimum wage? So, what is your view and what is your answer towards this question? Over to you.
My answer to this question is their wage should be based on what level of qualification does the young worker has. Like the higher the level, the higher the wage should be for them, and vice versa. If he or she does not have any qualification, then they should be paid the minimum wage, which is 1,200 ringgit. Thank you.
Well, so thank you, Mr. Amir. So basically, what he's telling is that the bare minimum should a person be skilled or not skilled, should be earning is the minimum wage that is 1,200. So that is his opinion. Thank you so much. So looks like we have had a very productive evening debating on the concept of minimum wage, whether it's a boon or bane. I hope our discussion today had broadened a lot of your views, your horizons on this matter. So I would thank all of our speakers, all of our listeners for attending today's panel discussion. Thank you so much. We hope to meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.